All right, so now continuing on our journey through the methods section. In this video, we'll be looking more specifically at how the methods section connects to other sections of a research article, because as I've mentioned in other videos, um, this IMRAD structure should be looked at as interconnected, and the method section does connect to other ones. We'll be looking in this video specifically at how it may connect to the introduction section. And so getting back to our old deodorant uh, sniff test method here, I asked you to look at the introduction of this study here, the effect of meat consumption on body odor attractiveness. I don't know why in the method section I've been so obsessed with deodorant and body odor. I guess because it's something that everybody can sort of relate to on some level. And so in this journal of chemical senses, there was this study which caught my attention. And certainly, if you're a meat eater, you want to pay attention. Maybe also if you don't eat meat, then maybe you'd be interested to know this as well. Uh, and so I asked you to look at the introduction, and in the third paragraph, um, there is a statement about what non-genetic factors can influence body odor. And it's interesting um, how this question or how this is brought into the discussion. And clearly, this is an example of what happens behind the scenes in an article, which is authors look at, okay, well, what variables or what issues, what factors can influence the data I have or my interpretations, my argumentation here. What are issues that will certainly be brought up by my peers or the reviewers of this manuscript, and these need to be brought in the introduction as issues, right? So here in this paragraph, in the introduction, it begins, however, not only is body odor pre-programmed by genetic factors, but also much variability is due to psychophysiological and ecological influences. For instance, it has been shown repeatedly that body odor changes across women's menstrual cycle, peaking in attractiveness around the time of ovulation. Body odor changes across women's menstrual cycle, peaking in attractiveness around the time of ovulation. Other studies found that, etc. So here, this will probably ring familiar to you if you've ever written a literature review. And so what is maybe different about a lit review at the master's level or the doctoral level is that those works, your dissertations, your theses, they will require you to demonstrate a sort of very broad reading. They'll require that you as it were, show your work, that you've read very widely and you know the subject you're writing about very well and deeply, breadth and depth of knowledge on the specific theme that you're writing about. In an article, however, what you're dealing with are the elements that directly go into your main point, your move 2 and your move 3. So your niche and your occupation of the niche. And it also goes back to what I've mentioned before about introducing extraneous characters. And so if you do try to include the whole entirety of everything that you introduce in your literature review in the introduction section, then people don't know, the reader may not be able to discern what characters to, quote unquote, characters to pay attention to, where you are steering the pilot in the plane. But here, the authors have done a pretty good job of introducing the characters that they know will contribute to advancing the plot or characters that will play a role in the story that they are telling. And in this case, one of the variables in the literature review that they're in this territory that they're covering is to do with psychophysiological and ecological influences. They know that this is going to be questioned, or it's something that can influence odor, and so therefore it needs to be talked about. And mentioning specifically menstrual cycle, and if this came out of the blue, if this was mentioned here and was not picked up again, you would think it might be a little bit strange. But as you'll see, these things about menstrual cycle and mood get picked up again, and these are characters that are introduced within the wider theme of psychophysiological and ecological influences that are key to the story that they're telling. Other elements that they talk about are eating habits. Obviously, food is it's one of the main points of this article, is going to influence smell. And they even report here that Hindu Indians who are usually vegetarians say that people who eat meat smell bad, which I think this is kind of funny, that this was a personal communication. I would like to see what that personal communication actually was. I'd like to see a direct quote, but anyway, I think that's kind of funny. And they mention this gap that, to our knowledge, this effect has not yet been tested under controlled conditions. And so they indicate a clear gap there. But they do a good coverage of the territory, of the factors that can influence smell. And so now, if you read the method section, can you find elements that were raised in the introduction section? And indeed, you do find things. So in the introduction section, menstrual cycle was mentioned, as we just saw. And then you see in the method section here the statement, none of the women were using hormonal contraception and all reported having normal menstrual cycle length, 25 to 40 days. They were also asked about the date of the onset of their last menstrual cycle bleeding, day 1. Women in the days of 9 to 15 of their cycle on the testing day were judged to be in the fertile phase, and others to be non-fertile phases of the cycle. So here they say, okay, we mentioned this in the introduction, and here we're making a clear statement that we have controlled for this variable. We've controlled for this variable. You naysayer who may be thinking, did they control this? Yeah, it's very clear. They've realized that this may be asked about, and they're showing very nice transparency here. Also within the same umbrella of what was mentioned in the introduction, they talk about mood. So they were also asked, it says here, they were also asked to keep a diary in which they recorded all the food eaten during the day, and alcoholic beverages and level of stress, fatigue, and general mood, using a 7-point scale, since they talk about mood being one of the things that can affect smell. Now, another point to be made here is that I'm giving the authors a lot of credit about this, the introduction and the method section here, about being very good about transparency. However, what I don't know is the extent to which the review process also had a hand in this transparency, because it could be that these points that were mentioned, that are being mentioned now, and in the detail with which they're being mentioned, were points that were improved upon or included after a review process, in which maybe the reviewer said, "Hey, you guys haven't talked about, how." What sort of scale you used to measure mood, or how you controlled for what food and beverages the participants were consuming. So the detail in which they're laying out all of these points in the method section could have happened as a function of the review process. We don't know. Okay, so as you can see, there's this kind of symbiosis really between the introduction and the method section, that the points, these characters that you introduce in the introduction section are because a lot of times they will affect the method, which of course will affect the results and then will affect the discussion. Um, and the method section kind of picks up on points introduced in the introduction section. So I like this quote here, that details create the bigger picture. In order for for the reviewer and ultimately the reader of your published article to be able to understand, the whole picture of uh, how you're arriving at the conclusions you're going to ultimately arrive at, is they need to understand. They need you to paint that picture for them, and that picture is large of how you arrive at your findings. That picture is painted basically in the method section. This point that I'm making now applies not only to quantitative primary data research, like the study I just showed you, but qualitative, ethnographic, all sorts of research, as well as arguably ethnographic, qualitative research. Um, it Maybe this applies even more because to be able to understand um, the complexity of the people that you're focusing on. Obviously, details matter. And so here you have details of the participants, which in this study are called odor donors. I find that term to be quite funny. I just can't imagine uh, people perhaps putting that on their resume that they were an odor donor, but there it is. And so here they talk about the participants. The 17 male participants of Charles University Prague agreed to participate in the study. Their mean age was 22.5 years, minimum 19 years, maximum 31 years. Body weight 75.5 kilograms, minimum of 63 kilograms, maximum 88 kilograms. And body height 182 centimeters, minimum 171 centimeters, maximum 200 centimeters. All of them were non-smokers, reported no dermatological or other diseases, and did not shave their armpits. The donors, because that's where they collected the samples from, with the armpits, the donors were given CZK 2000, approximately 45 British pounds. This is, sorry, Czech 2000, this is the Czech currency versus the British currency is 45, as compensation of their time and potential inconvenience caused by the prescribed diet. And so this may seem like overkill to some, like what do they really need to include all this? But I would say that actually, if there's a place that you want to lean towards you know, excessive transparency, it would be the method section, because you can always cut stuff out later. But here you see that they talk not only about the number of um, uh, participants, but what's their sex, the context where it happened, their mean age, but also maximum and minimum, um, their height. These are all points that help paint that picture of who the participants were, where they were from, um, and uh, and and then of course factors. These are not just sort of random. This is not random information. These are all factors here that can influence the data. Non-smoker, no other diseases, and body hair. And then if they were compensated, all this is them trying to paint that bigger picture of where these data came from. Compare that with that silly method section, this fictitious method section written for the deodorant experiment. So you can see that this sort of thing, which I've seen too much of, even though this is an exaggerated form of it, I've seen it before, is one of the reasons pointed out by Pearson as a reason why manuscripts are rejected. And therefore, when you look through your articles that you read, now hopefully you have an awareness of this. Um, how do the papers that you read, how do they set up the method? Are they look at the information that they're including, not as just sort of random information, but information that is tied to the naysayer, and how the naysayer may be thinking, okay, well, how is this author, how are these authors arriving at their conclusions, and how these details in the method section are not isolated but tie into other sections in the article. And so it's a shame when you have a section written like this here, when just including more detail like this would make in the odor donor example would make a difference in causing a more positive impression in the reviewer, right? And so good writers, they hear that naysayer, and you can just imagine, as the person is writing, they're hearing the naysayer say, okay, well, how do you know participants followed instructions? What about the odor contamination from outside smells? But how fresh were the smells to begin with, but what about the effects of repeated testing? These are questions that the authors anticipated perhaps, or maybe after or through the review process. And so when they thought, the naysayer may ask, how do you know that participants followed the instructions? In other words, did they eating only what they were supposed to eat, or actually rigorously following the diet diary? So they wrote, to check the odor donor's conformity with instructions, we carefully examined the diet diary. Okay. What about odor contamination from outside smells? And they said, well, to avoid odor contamination from odor donors' clothes or background odor, the donors were asked to wear new white 100% cotton T-shirts, previously washed without washing powder. So they're clear about that. And also anticipating this question, what about how fresh were the smells? Well, they write that in as well, talking again directly to that naysayer, saying, well, to avoid possible effects of refrigeration on the stimuli, olfactory rating of the sample started within an hour after collection. So they know that was going to be a problem. They put that into the research design, and they include it in the description saying, hey, by the way, we did control for this. Don't worry, we got you covered. What about the effects of repeated testing? Well, to cover that statistically, they said, well, to test the possible effect of repeated testing, we performed repeated measures ANOVAs for each of the dependent variables, e.g. pleasantness, using odor donors as a unit of analysis. And so they address that issue as well. So the point here is, one rule of thumb, one thing that can help you when you're writing your method section is, don't just say what you did, but also try to think of or make it clear why you did it. So where many people will simply write, we carefully examine the diet diaries, which is basically saying what you did, that's fine, but even better, to check the odor donor's conformity with the instructions, we carefully examine diet diaries. So you can see here that the intention here is to simply say what one did, which is what often people think of as the method section. But here, you're saying what you did and being clear of why you did it, because that's explaining to the critical reviewer, um, uh, making it very crystal clear that you're dealing with these critical questions. And another example here, the donors were asked to wear new white 100% cotton T-shirts. Well, again, I've seen manuscripts that have that sort of thing, that sort of statement. That's sort of, okay, yeah, you did that. That's good. That's fine. You're explaining what you did. the instruments used, as it were. But a better way to do that, speaking more directly to the naysayers, to avoid odor contamination from odor donors' clothes or background color, the donors were asked to wear new white 100% cotton t-shirts. Very simple. You have that information, of course, when you're writing. You know what you did, but also try to explain why you did that, because that is a key point in dealing with those critical questions. So when you write your method section, again, of course, you're going to think about it as connected to other sections. Another way to look at this IMRAD structure is that the introduction is the why you're doing the research. The method section is how you did the research. The results section is what happened as a result of that method section of the how. And then finally, discussion is the so what, why, how, what, and so what. Is kind of more broadly how you can conceive what those sections mean. But I think that actually this question of why is one that needs to be present in all the sections. So yes, you're focusing on why the research is necessary in the introduction, but when you write the method section, don't write just how, but how you did something and why you did it that way. The results section is what you get, but it's also what you get, and if you've done your method section well, then they'll understand why you got those results. And in the discussion section, it's the so what of those results and the research as a whole. What does it mean in the broader context? But also why you think those are why you think that is the so what. Why you, the authors, think that those are the implications or the applications of the results. And so that question of why should be present throughout, and the how and why is one that is a good way to remember about how to structure your method section. Is not just talk about the how, but talk about the why. And that's the method section in a nutshell. Don't forget that you have your introduction sections that will be looked at, and you will have your first round of reviews, and you can now already, if you have a method section to write, you can look at it now and see if you already have a method section written, you can look at it now and see to what extent it reflects some of the points that I've made here. If you still have to write your method section, you can do that. Or of course, if you don't have one right now, that's fine too. And otherwise, if you can just reflect on how the method section points that I've made here may eventually apply to your context and your reality for future articles. And still now, irrespective of whether you have a method section or not, please do focus on redrafting your introduction. Keep polishing that, because again, that's going to be your main calling card, your foot in the door for your article being read positively by a reviewer. And now you know that how it connects to the method section.